a grand country club ballroom, a black man in a crisp police uniform stands quietly near the exit. He is working security for a rich wedding crowd that barely notices him. He is a shadow against the glittering backdrop of crystal and laughter, a silent guardian of a world that does not see him as part of it. The bride, a vision in white, spots him during her photo session. A cruel smile touches her lips as she mocks him, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think wearing a badge makes you part of our world?" she asks, a sneer in her tone. Guests laugh, a wave of uncomfortable, complicit sound. The officer remains calm, silent, his face an unreadable mask of discipline. What she doesn't know is that Officer Marcus Reed isn't just a security cop. He is a decorated police lieutenant working undercover on a federal task force, and his target is her new husband. Before the night ends, this same nobody will walk her groom out of his own wedding in handcuffs, and every single guest who laughed will watch in stunned, breathless silence. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The ballroom was a galaxy of light. Chandeliers dripped with crystal teardrops, casting a warm golden glow over the sea of guests. The air hummed with expensive perfume, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the low murmur of privileged conversation. At the center of this universe stood the bride, Chelsea Whitman, and her new husband, Bradley Cole. A photographer buzzed around them like a frantic insect, his camera flashing, capturing their manufactured joy for eternity. Chelsea, a woman whose entire life was a carefully curated performance, tilted her head just so, her smile practiced and perfect. She was the star, the sun around which all these lesser planets revolved. Her dress, a mountain of silk and lace, was worth more than the cars some of her guests drove. Her happiness was an asset, something to be displayed and admired. Bradley stood beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. He was handsome in a generic way, with a salesman's smile and eyes that were always calculating. He looked at Chelsea not with love, but with the satisfaction of a man who had just acquired a beautiful, valuable object. The laughter was easy, the champagne flowed like water, and for a moment, the illusion was complete. It was a perfect night in a perfect world. Then, Chelsea's smile faltered. Her eyes, scanning the room for any imperfection, any detail out of place, landed on a figure standing near the grand oak doors at the far end of the ballroom. It was a black police officer, his uniform a stark, dark contrast to the pale pastels and glittering gowns of her guests. He stood with his back straight, his hands clasped behind him, his presence a quiet, disciplined intrusion into her flawless fantasy. A wrinkle of annoyance appeared between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. He was a smudge on her otherwise pristine canvas. The photographer, sensing her distraction, lowered his camera. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Cole?" he asked. Chelsea didn't answer him. Her voice, when it came, was sharp and loud, cutting through the pleasant hum of the party. "He's ruining my pictures," she snapped, pointing a slender finger tipped with a blood-red nail. The room quieted, heads turned. All eyes followed her gesture to the man by the door. "Can someone move the officer?" she demanded, her tone dripping with the casual authority of someone who had never been told no. "This is a private event." A wave of unease rippled through the guests. They exchanged awkward glances, their smiles tightening. This was not part of the script. The man in question, Officer Marcus Reed, did not react. His face remained impassive, a study in calm. He simply met the bride's furious gaze with a steady, unblinking look that revealed nothing. He was a statue carved from patience. He had heard worse. He had dealt with worse. This was merely noise. A woman in a pearl necklace whispered to her husband, "How dreadful." Her husband just shook his head, taking a slow sip of his drink, not wanting to get involved. The groom, Bradley, seemed to sense the shift in the room's atmosphere. He placed a placating hand on Chelsea's arm. "Babe, chill," he murmured, his smile strained. "He's just doing his job. It's fine." But Chelsea was not fine. She shook his hand off, incensed that he would dare to contradict her on her day. "It's not fine, Bradley," she retorted, her voice rising. "It's my wedding. It's supposed to be perfect." She turned her attention back to Marcus, a smirk twisting her lips. She leaned towards her maid of honor and whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Probably the janitor playing dress-up." A few of her friends, the ones whose loyalty was bought and paid for, let out a ripple of sycophantic laughter. It was a cruel, sharp sound that made other guests cringe. The insult hung in the air, thick and ugly. Marcus's expression did not change. Not a muscle in his jaw twitched. He was a mountain, and her words were just a weak breeze blowing against it. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a small concession to her demand. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he moved back, melting further into the shadows near the exit. He did not look angry. He did not look humiliated. He simply looked observant. He was watching. He was waiting. From across the room, a young waitress named Samantha Torres watched the entire exchange, her heart sinking with each venomous word the bride uttered. Her tray of empty champagne flutes felt suddenly heavy in her hands. She looked from the bride's smug, triumphant face to the officer's stoic calm, and a sense of deep, profound wrongness settled in her stomach. She was horrified, not just by the bride's cruelty, but by the easy laughter of the guests, by the groom's weak attempt to quiet his new wife, by the collective agreement to just let it happen. It was a poison that everyone was willingly drinking. The groom, Bradley, pulled his bride closer, trying to smooth over the jagged moment. "Okay, babe." He moved. "Let's get back to the photos," he said, forcing a cheerful tone. Chelsea tossed her hair back, her victory making her magnanimous. She beamed at the camera, her perfect smile back in place. The photographer raised his lens again, and the flash went off, a brilliant, blinding burst of light. It froze the scene in time, the arrogant bride, the awkward groom, the complicit guests, and the quiet, watchful officer in the shadows. It was the precise moment that Chelsea Whitman, in her palace of glass and light, mocked the wrong man. And in doing so, she had just lit the fuse on a bomb that would shatter her perfect world into a million pieces. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom closed behind Marcus, muffling the sound of the forced celebration within. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the stuffy atmosphere of wealth and entitlement. He leaned against the stone balustrade overlooking the country club's manicured golf course, the distant city lights twinkling like fallen stars. The soft crackle of his radio was a comforting sound, a link to a world of order and consequence that felt a million miles away from the fantasy playing out inside. He took a deep, steadying breath, letting the bride's words wash over him and then fade away. They were meaningless. They were the buzzing of an insect, annoying but ultimately harmless. He had a job to do, and her opinion of him was not a factor in the equation. A black, unmarked SUV with tinted windows was parked discreetly in the service driveway below. It was invisible to the arriving guests, but perfectly positioned. Inside, 2 federal agents sat in the dark, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of their equipment. They had been listening to the ballroom's ambient audio through a small bug Marcus had planted earlier. The voice of Agent Collins crackled through Marcus's earpiece, low and professional. "Heard that? You good, Lieutenant?" Marcus didn't need to ask what he meant. He had heard the bride's sneering comments. "I'm good," Marcus replied, his voice a low rumble. "Just enjoying the view." There was a pause, and then the other agent, a younger man named Peterson, chimed in. "Still think this guy's clean? The bride sounds like royalty, usually a sign the king is crooked." Marcus's eyes remained fixed on the ballroom, on the blurred figures dancing behind the tall, arched windows. "We'll know soon enough," he said. His voice was calm, but beneath the surface a current of focused intensity ran deep. This was not just another assignment for Lieutenant Marcus Reed. He was here in this uniform. Here. In this, that the bride had mistaken for a costume as part of a joint undercover operation with the FBI. Their target was not a drug lord or a terrorist, but a man in a tuxedo celebrating his marriage. The groom, Bradley Cole. The tech world knew Bradley as a brilliant entrepreneur, a visionary who had made millions in cryptocurrency. The federal government, however, knew him as something else entirely. They saw him as a key player in a sophisticated money laundering scheme, funneling illicit cash through a maze of shell corporations and fraudulent tech investments. He was slick, he was careful, and he was very, very rich. Marcus had volunteered for this specific part of the operation, posing as low-level event security. It felt personal. The request had come across his desk, and something about the details had resonated with a memory he kept locked away. His father, a good cop with 30 years on the force, had once been subjected to a similar humiliation. He had been working a private detail for a wealthy politician and had been dismissed, treated like a piece of furniture by people who thought their money made them better. His father had never complained, had never shown his anger. But Marcus, who was just a boy at the time, had seen the hurt in his eyes. He had seen the quiet dignity with which his father had absorbed the insult, and it had taught him a powerful lesson. Dignity was not something others could give you or take from you. It was something you carried within yourself. So this wasn't about revenge. Revenge was messy and emotional. This was about justice. It was about closing a loop, not for himself, but for the memory of his father. It was about proving that the uniform, the badge, meant something. It was a symbol of a promise to uphold the law, equally for everyone, regardless of their bank account or social standing. The people inside that ballroom saw a security guard. They saw a man they could mock and dismiss. They didn't see the years of training, the commendations for bravery, the lives he had saved, or the complex investigation he was currently leading. They saw what they wanted to see, a stereotype that fit their narrow worldview. And that was his greatest advantage. He was invisible. He was underestimated. And from that position of perceived weakness, he held all the power. He pressed the small button on his radio, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Stay ready," he said to the agents in the SUV. "We move when the call comes." Colin's voice came back instantly, all business. "Copy that, Lieutenant. The arrest warrant is signed and ready. We're just waiting on your signal for final confirmation of the asset transfer." Marcus nodded to himself in the darkness. The trap was set. The bait was the wedding itself, a grand display of wealth designed to impress new investors, who were, in reality, undercover federal agents. Bradley Cole thought he was sealing the biggest deal of his life tonight. He had no idea he was actually just tying the knot on his own indictment. Marcus turned his gaze back to the glowing windows of the ballroom. He could see Chelsea laughing, holding up her glass in a toast. She was so sure of her place in the world. He felt a fleeting, distant pity for her. She had built her life on a foundation of lies, and tonight, the ground was about to give way beneath her feet. The night was still young. He would wait. Patience was a weapon, and he wielded it with expert precision. Inside the glittering ballroom, Samantha Torres moved through the crowd like a ghost. Her job was to be unobtrusive, to anticipate a guest's need for another glass of champagne or a fresh napkin before they even realized it themselves. She was supposed to be invisible, a functioning part of the party's machinery. But tonight, she couldn't disappear. The bride's cruel words echoed in her mind, replaying on a loop. Probably the janitor playing dress-up. The casual cruelty of it, the way the other guests had laughed, had curdled something inside her. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood where people respected a uniform. Her own uncle was a firefighter. He ran into burning buildings while people like this worried about a cop ruining their photographs. The injustice of it all made her hands tremble slightly as she refilled a flute for a man complaining about the stock market. She tried to focus on her work, on the rhythm of clearing plates and pouring drinks, but her eyes kept drifting towards the exit, to the spot where the officer had stood. She wondered if he was all right, if words like that still had the power to wound him. She hoped he knew that not everyone in this room was like them. Later in the evening, during a lull between the main course and the cake cutting, Samantha was heading towards the kitchens with a heavy tray. She took a shortcut through a side corridor that led to a service exit. As she pushed the door open, she saw him. Officer Reed was standing just outside, his back to her, speaking quietly into his radio. He wasn't talking about party security. The words she caught were clipped and serious. No visual on the transfer yet. Stand by for confirmation. It sounded official, important. It sounded nothing like the work of a simple event guard. He finished his transmission and turned, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't look surprised to see her. A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, passed across his face. Samantha's heart beat a little faster. She felt like she had stumbled upon a secret, a play being performed just beneath the surface of the main event. She hesitated for a moment, then found her voice. "Excuse me, officer," she said softly, her words barely a whisper. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what she said. The bride. It was awful." Marcus looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw a young woman with kind eyes and a worried expression. He saw the genuine empathy on her face, a rare commodity in this environment. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, softening the hard lines of his face. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm and steady. "But you don't need to apologize for her." He paused, then added, "You'd be surprised how much people show you who they really are when they think you don't matter." His calm wisdom settled over her, a strange and powerful reassurance. He wasn't hurt. He was observing. It was like he was a scientist studying a strange new species in its natural habitat. She felt a surge of respect for him, for his quiet strength. She was about to turn and leave him to his work when the sound of raised voices came from a nearby alcove just around the corner from the main ballroom. Two men, both wearing tuxedos that matched the groom's party, were having a hushed but intense conversation. They were trying to be discreet, but their anxiety made them careless. Samantha instinctively stepped back into the shadows of the doorway, pulling her tray with her. Marcus didn't move, but his posture shifted, his attention sharpening like a razor's edge. "I'm telling you, the timing is too risky," the first groomsman whispered urgently. "Doing this tonight with all these people here, it's insane." The second man scoffed, his voice arrogant. "Relax. Brad knows what he's doing. He said the wedding makes it the perfect cover. No one's paying attention. He needs that offshore account funded by morning. The deal has to be sealed before the feds notice the new algorithm." The first man was not convinced. "And what if they already have? What if someone talks?" "Who's gonna talk?" the second man sneered. "Everyone here is on the payroll, one way or another." They moved off, their voices fading as they rejoined the party. Samantha's blood ran cold. Offshore account, feds, payroll. The words slammed into her, connecting with a sickening certainty. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a business deal, a dirty one. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Marcus, and she saw in his eyes that he had heard it too. His calm expression was now gone, replaced by a look of intense, locked-in focus. He knew. He had known all along. In that instant, Samantha made a decision. She couldn't just stand by and do nothing. She couldn't be one of the silent, complicit guests who just let things happen. She fumbled in her server's apron for the small notepad and pen she used for taking drink orders. Her hands shook as she scribbled down the words she had overheard. Offshore account, funded by morning, sealed before the feds notice. She tore the small slip of paper from the pad, folded it twice, and stepped towards Marcus. She pressed it into his hand. "I don't know what's going on," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "But I think you need to know this." Marcus looked down at the note, then back at her. He gave her a single, solemn nod. It was a nod of gratitude, of understanding, of shared purpose. In that moment, Samantha Torres, the invisible waitress, had just become a key witness, and she had handed the patient officer the final piece of the puzzle he had been waiting for. Earlier that same day, just hours before he would stand at the altar, Bradley Cole was not thinking about his bride. He was in his hotel suite surrounded by his closest friends, his groomsmen, popping the cork on a bottle of ridiculously expensive champagne. The mood was celebratory, but the energy was tense, electric with something more than pre-wedding jitters. Bradley, dressed in a silk robe, paced the room with his phone pressed to his ear, a wide, confident grin on his face. "Listen to me," he said into the phone, his voice a low, commanding hum. "The transfer will happen tonight, during the reception. It's perfect. No one will be looking. It's the biggest crypto deal of my career, and I'm not letting it slip away." He laughed, a sound full of arrogance. "Worried? Don't be. I'm untouchable." He hung up the phone and raised his glass to his best man, a man named Eric, who looked perpetually nervous. "To being untouchable," Bradley declared, and his friends echoed the toast, their laughter a little too loud, a little too forced. What the tuxedo-clad groomsmen knew, and what the wedding guests would never suspect, was that Bradley Cole's tech empire was a house of cards. His company, Cole Digital Solutions, was not the revolutionary innovator it claimed to be. It was a front, a sophisticated washing machine for laundering millions of dollars for a shadowy consortium of international clients. The money came in dirty, from illegal arms sales, cybercrime, and offshore tax evasion, and through a series of complex, lightning-fast cryptocurrency transactions and fake tech investments. It came out clean. Bradley was the master of this digital laundry. He was charismatic, brilliant, and utterly devoid of a conscience. The federal investigation had been running for 18 months. It was a slow, painstaking process of following digital breadcrumbs, untangling encrypted codes, and turning low-level employees into informants. They had been building their case piece by piece, waiting for the right moment to strike. Bradley, however, had grown bold. His success had made him reckless, and he was planning his biggest wash yet, a massive transfer of funds that would solidify his position with his dangerous clients. His wedding, he reasoned, was the perfect cover. It was a public declaration of his legitimacy, a spectacle of wealth and class that would distract everyone from the quiet, illicit business being conducted in the background. He was surrounding himself with influential people, bankers, politicians, investors, creating a wall of perceived respectability. He believed that no one would dare to disrupt such a high-profile event. He thought he was hiding in plain sight. He was wrong. The feds, tipped off by an informant about the timing of the big transfer, saw the wedding not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity. It was the perfect stage. All the key players would be in one room, distracted and celebrating, and Bradley himself would be at his most arrogant, his most vulnerable. The plan was meticulously crafted. They needed someone on the inside, someone who could move freely without arousing suspicion, someone who could be the eyes and ears of the operation and give the final signal to move in. That someone was Lieutenant Marcus Reed. His orders were simple and direct. Pose as event security. Observe the target. Confirm any evidence of the illegal transaction taking place, and then, when the time was right, execute the arrest. The arrest itself was to be handled with precision. Confirm evidence, then arrest quietly, his superior officer had instructed him. They didn't want a chaotic scene if they could avoid it. They wanted to dismantle Bradley Cole's empire with the surgical quiet of a professional operation. Marcus was the perfect man for the job. He had a reputation for being unshakable, for keeping his cool under immense pressure. He could blend into the background, his calm demeanor a form of camouflage. He understood the psychology of men like Bradley Cole, men who believed their money and power made them invincible. Marcus knew that their arrogance was not a shield, but a fatal flaw. As he stood outside the ballroom, the waitress's note clutched in his hand, he felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Offshore account funded by morning. It was confirmation. Bradley was making his move tonight right under the noses of his unsuspecting guests. Marcus wasn't just security. He was a hunter, patiently waiting for his prey to walk into the crosshairs. And Bradley Cole, laughing and toasting to his own brilliance inside that ballroom, had no idea that his perfectly planned wedding was about to become the scene of his own spectacular downfall. The party reached its peak. The band was playing a loud, upbeat song, and the dance floor was a swirling mass of expensive dresses and well-tailored suits. The air was thick with the sweet smell of cake and the heady scent of champagne. Chelsea Cole, no longer Chelsea Whitman, was in her element. She had had several glasses of champagne, and the alcohol had amplified her already inflated sense of self-importance. Her confidence was a bright, brittle thing, glittering under the chandeliers. She held court near the towering wedding cake. A circle of her closest friends gathered around her, laughing at her every word. It was then that she saw him again. Officer Marcus Reed had re-entered the ballroom, taking up a new position near the main bar. He was still quiet, still watchful, a silent pillar of sobriety, in a room, drowning in excess. The sight of him pricked Chelsea's bubble of perfect happiness. He was a reminder of an uglier reality she did not want to acknowledge. She felt a petty need to reassert her dominance, to put him back in what she considered his place. Leaning in towards her friends, she raised her voice so the people at the surrounding tables could hear. "Can you believe the nerve of some people?" she said, gesturing vaguely with her champagne flute in Marcus's direction. "They just don't know their place. You'd think for the money we're paying for security, they'd at least hire someone who fits in." Her friends, buoyed by alcohol and a shared sense of superiority, giggled obligingly. "Honestly, Chelsea, you're too nice," one of them said. "I would have had him thrown out hours ago." The arrogance in the air was suffocating, a toxic cloud of privilege. A few feet away, a guest, an older businessman who had dealings with Chelsea's father, overheard the comment. A look of deep unease crossed his face. He nervously excused himself from his table, mumbling something about needing to make a phone call. He had seen men like Bradley Cole before, men who flew too close to the sun. He didn't like the feeling he was getting. He didn't like the bride's reckless cruelty. Something was wrong. Samantha Torres, clearing glasses from a nearby table, watched the scene with a growing sense of disgust. She saw the nervous guest hurry away. She saw the bride's smug satisfaction. She looked over at Marcus, who seemed completely unfazed, his gaze sweeping over the crowd with a calm, methodical patience. He was a man at work. If only she knew, Samantha muttered to herself, the words a bitter taste in her mouth. She felt a strange sense of ownership over the secret she now shared with the quiet officer. She knew what was coming, and the knowledge was a heavy weight. Chelsea's perfect night was beginning to fray at the edges, even if she was too drunk and self-absorbed to notice. Whispers had started to circulate through the room, quiet at first, but growing in volume. It wasn't just about the bride's behavior. Guests were noticing other things that seemed out of place. Two well-dressed men who looked vaguely familiar, like government agents from a movie, had appeared near the bar. They weren't drinking. They weren't talking to anyone. They were just scanning the crowd, their eyes sharp and focused. Another man in a dark suit was speaking quietly into his cufflink near the entrance to the terrace. The atmosphere was subtly shifting. The carefree celebration was being replaced by a low-grade hum of anxiety. People started checking their phones more often. The laughter on the dance floor seemed a little more strained. The groom, Bradley, seemed to be getting agitated, glancing at his watch every few minutes. He was trying to look relaxed, but a thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. Chelsea, however, noticed none of it. She was laughing, oblivious, demanding the photographer take yet another picture of her feeding a piece of cake to her new husband. She was trapped in her own spotlight, blind to the shadows that were rapidly closing in around her. The clock on the ballroom wall, an ornate monstrosity of gold and mahogany, showed the time. 10:47 p.m. The band had just finished a song, and in the momentary quiet, the underlying tension in the room became palpable. Marcus Reed saw it. He felt it. The target was getting nervous. The whispers from the groomsman, the note from the waitress, and now the groom's own anxious behavior, it was all pointing to one conclusion. The transfer was happening, now. With a final sweeping glance across the room, Marcus turned and stepped back outside onto the cool, dark terrace. The night air was a shock to the system after the overheated ballroom. He lifted his radio to his mouth, his movements calm and economical. There was no hesitation in his voice, no trace of emotion. He was a surgeon about to make the first incision. He pressed the transmit button. 5 simple words cut through the static, words that would set in motion the destruction of 2 lives and a criminal empire. Confirm. Target is in motion. He released the button and the silence of the night rushed back in. For a second there was nothing. Then a voice, crisp and clear, came through his earpiece. It was Agent Collins, sitting in the dark SUV just 100 yards away. Proceed. That was it. The waiting was over. The time for observation had passed. Now was the time for action. Marcus straightened his police uniform, the fabric crisp and reassuring. He adjusted the weight of the equipment on his belt. He was no longer a shadow, a piece of the background. He was an officer of the law, an instrument of justice. He re-entered the ballroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind him with a soft, final thud. The room seemed quiet as he stepped inside. Or maybe it was just the focus in his own mind, a narrowing of his senses until all the extraneous noise faded away. He saw his target. Bradley Cole was standing in a small circle of men Marcus recognized from surveillance photos as potential investors. Bradley was laughing, a wide, false laugh, holding a glass of champagne. He was completely blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over his head. Marcus began to walk. His steps were slow, deliberate, and unhurried. He did not rush. He did not run. He moved with the unstoppable, inexorable force of a tide coming in. He walked a straight line from the door towards the center of the room, directly towards Bradley Cole. The band, about to start their next song, hesitated. The drummer held his sticks poised above the snare. The lead singer looked questioningly at his bandmates. The low hum of conversation in the room began to falter, as one by one people turned to watch the lone officer's steady advance. The rhythm of the story tightened, the air grew thick, with unspoken questions. What was happening? Who was this cop? Why was he walking like that? The music faded completely. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic footfall of Marcus's polished black shoes on the marble floor. It was the calm before the storm, the deafening silence before the thunderclap, and every eye in the room was on him. The music did not just fade, it died. The last note from the saxophone hung in the air for a moment, and then vanished, swallowed by a sudden heavy silence. Every head in the grand ballroom turned. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. The collective gaze of 200 guests focused on the single point of motion in the room. The steady, relentless advance of the black police officer they had all dismissed. Marcus did not break his stride. He walked past the wedding cake, a monument to a fantasy that was about to crumble. He walked past the dance floor, a space that had been filled with joy just moments before, and was now a silent, empty stage. His eyes were locked on one man only, Bradley Cole. Bradley, who had been in the middle of a sentence, felt the change in the room's atmosphere before he saw the cause. The laughter of his investors died on their lips. Their smiles evaporated. They took an involuntary step back away from him, as if he had suddenly become contagious. Bradley turned, a confused and irritated expression on his face, and saw Marcus approaching. For a fraction of a second, he looked merely annoyed, as if he were about to reprimand a servant for an interruption. Then he saw the look in Marcus's eyes. It was not the look of a security guard. It was the look of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. The blood drained from Bradley's face. Marcus stopped directly in front of him. He was close enough to see the beads of sweat on the groom's upper lip. He did not raise his voice. He spoke in a tone that was firm, clear, and carried across the silent room with absolute authority. "Bradley Cole," he said, the name sounding like a judgment. "You are under arrest." The words hit the room like a physical blow. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, echoed through the ballroom. People froze, champagne glasses held halfway to their lips. The photographer, standing near the bride, instinctively raised his camera, the flash firing with a brilliant, shocking burst of light. It illuminated the scene. The officer, calm and implacable. The groom, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning terror. And the bride, Chelsea, standing a few feet away, her hand flying to her mouth. The bouquet of white roses she was holding slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the polished marble floor with a soft funereal thud. "This is a mistake," Chelsea screamed, her voice shrill and ragged. The spell of silence was broken. Her dream, her perfect, flawless dream, was being torn apart right in front of her. "You can't do this. This is my wedding. He's my husband." Her words were a desperate, useless shield against the unfolding reality. Marcus ignored her completely. His focus remained entirely on Bradley. As he spoke, two other men, the same two who had been scanning the crowd from the bar, moved in from either side. They were dressed in sharp suits, but they moved with a fluid, disciplined grace that marked them as federal agents. They flanked Bradley, cutting off any possibility of escape. "You are under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice," Marcus continued, his voice as even and steady as a heartbeat. He began to recite the Miranda rights, the familiar words, a formal declaration that Bradley's world of lies was over. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Guests scrambled for their phones. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a frenzied desire to capture the moment. The room filled with the blue light of 100 tiny screens, all recording the spectacular implosion of Bradley Cole's life. Chelsea turned pale, a sickly, chalky white. She clutched at her chest, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The man she had married, the man whose wealth and power were supposed to be her shield for the rest of her life, was being put in handcuffs. An agent behind Bradley pulled his arms back, the click of the metal cuffs locking into place sounding unnaturally loud in the stunned silence. Her millionaire groom, the untouchable man, was now a prisoner. Marcus took Bradley firmly by the arm and began to lead him away, back across the silent dance floor, towards the same grand oak doors that he had been ordered to stand away from. He was escorting the groom out of his own wedding, just as he knew he would. The irony was devastating. Chelsea stumbled forward, her extravagant dress hampering her movements. She rushed after them, her face a mess of tears and disbelief, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Stop! Let him go! Do you have any idea who we are?" she shrieked at Marcus's back. This was her final, desperate appeal to the power of status, the only power she had ever known. It was the one card she had left to play. Marcus stopped. He did not turn around immediately. He let her words hang in the air, let every guest absorb their pathetic, impotent rage. Then slowly he turned his head just enough to look at her over his shoulder. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for his response. His voice, when it came, was quiet, devoid of anger or triumph. It was the flat, factual tone of a man stating a simple truth. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I do." He paused for a beat, letting the words sink in. "That's why you're not in cuffs, too." He held her gaze for a moment longer, then added a single devastating word. "Yet." The room fell so completely silent that you could have heard a pin drop. It was a silence born of pure, unadulterated shock. The threat, delivered so calmly, was more terrifying than any shout. It hung in the air, a promise of future consequences. Every guest who had laughed at her cruel jokes, who had shared in her mockery, now stared at her. They were not looking at her with pity, but with a kind of horrified fascination, as if they were watching a slow-motion car crash. Their amusement had curdled into shame. They looked away, suddenly intensely interested in their shoes, their drinks, the ceiling, anything but the bride's face. Chelsea froze. The word "yet" struck her like a physical blow. It was a window opening onto a terrifying new reality, a world where her name and her money were not a shield but a liability, a world where she too was accountable. The strength went out of her legs. Her body, which had been rigid with fury, suddenly went limp. She swayed on her feet, the room tilting around her. She collapsed into a nearby chair, the mountain of silk and lace that was her wedding dress deflating around her like a burst balloon. Her dream wedding had not just been interrupted, it had been executed. It was over. Her life as she knew it was over. As Chelsea sat there, staring into the abyss that had just opened up at her feet, a hand touched her shoulder gently. She looked up and saw the waitress, Samantha. The young woman's face was not gloating or triumphant. It was filled with a quiet, somber pity. Samantha helped steady her, placing a glass of water on the table in front of her. The irony of the moment was lost on no one who saw it. The servant was comforting the queen whose castle had just been turned to dust. The woman who had been so obsessed with everyone knowing their proper place now had no place left to go. Her world had been turned upside down by the very man she had tried to put beneath her. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. News headlines blazed across television screens and newspaper front pages. "Millionaire Groom arrested at altar," one screamed. "Tech mogul's wedding day raid," read another. But it was the cell phone footage, shaky and raw, that truly captivated the nation. The video of Marcus Reed's calm, deliberate walk across the ballroom, his firm and steady voice as he made the arrest, and his final devastating exchange with the hysterical bride went viral. It was played on a loop on every news channel, dissected by commentators, and shared millions of times across social media. The narrative was irresistible. It was a story of hubris and consequence, of quiet dignity triumphing over loud arrogance. In a world that often felt unjust, here was a moment of perfect, satisfying clarity. Marcus was lauded as a national hero. People praised his incredible professionalism, his restraint in the face of public humiliation. He became a symbol of integrity, the calm cop who had exposed a web of corruption with quiet grace. His police department, initially wary of the high-profile nature of the case, was flooded with positive calls and emails. They had no choice but to embrace their new star. Within days, they announced that Lieutenant Marcus Reed was being recommended for a special commendation and a promotion to captain for his exemplary leadership and conduct. For Chelsea, the public square was not so kind. The same viral video that made Marcus a hero turned her into a villain. She became a meme, a cautionary tale, a trending topic for all the wrong reasons. She was Wedding Day Karen, the bridezilla who mocked a hero. Her sneering words, "You think wearing a badge makes you part of our world?" were endlessly quoted and ridiculed. Her life, once a private fortress of privilege, was now public property, picked apart by strangers who delighted in her downfall. The consequences spread like a contagion. Chelsea's father, a prominent investment banker, saw his company's stock plummet. His name had been linked to Bradley's illicit deals in the initial press releases, and now his own business was under federal investigation. Long-time partners pulled their investments. Corporate sponsors, terrified of being associated with the toxic scandal, dropped their contracts. The empire he had spent a lifetime building was beginning to crumble, all because of the man his daughter had thought was a nobody. Chelsea was exiled to her parents' sprawling mansion, a prisoner in a gilded cage. She couldn't go out without being recognized and harassed. The friends who had laughed at her jokes now screened her calls. The world she had lorded over had turned on her completely. She was a pariah, a living symbol of entitled arrogance getting its comeuppance. The same social status she had used as a weapon had now become the brand of her shame. Meanwhile, Bradley Cole's legal troubles mounted. Denied bail due to being a flight risk, he sat in a federal detention center trading his tuxedo for an orange jumpsuit. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The undercover agents he thought were his new investors had recorded every incriminating conversation. The waitress's note had helped the FBI pinpoint the exact timing of the final illegal transfer, allowing them to seize the digital assets in real time. His empire of lies had been dismantled in a single night. The media frenzy continued for days, a relentless storm of exposure. Every article, every news segment, kept circling back to that one pivotal moment. The instant a bride's cruel words set in motion a reckoning that would spare no one. Her attempt to humiliate one man had ended in the humiliation of her entire world. The scales of justice, which often seemed to tip in favor of the rich and powerful, had for once been balanced with stunning and public precision. And it was all because one woman had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the quiet man in the uniform. A few days after the wedding that wasn't, the media storm had begun to subside, replaced by the slow, grinding gears of the legal system. Samantha Torres found herself with an unexpected day off. The country club, now infamous, had temporarily closed its doors to events, trying to manage the public relations disaster. She thought about what to do with her free time. She could catch up on sleep, see a movie, try to forget the whole surreal experience. But she couldn't. She felt a pull, a need for closure. She found the address for the downtown police precinct online, and after an hour of wrestling with her own nerves, she found herself standing in front of the imposing stone building. The front desk sergeant looked at her skeptically when she asked to see Lieutenant Reed, but when she gave her name, his expression changed. He picked up his phone and murmured into it. A few minutes later, Marcus himself emerged from a hallway, no longer in his dress uniform, but in the simple, practical attire of a working detective. He smiled when he saw her. "Samantha, I was hoping you'd stop by," he said, his voice warm. He led her to a small, quiet break room, away from the hustle of the main precinct. He poured her a cup of surprisingly decent coffee. "I wanted to thank you," he said, his expression serious. "That note you gave me, it was the final piece. You helped us secure millions of dollars in illegal assets before they disappeared forever. You were very brave." Samantha felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "I didn't feel brave," she admitted. "I was terrified. I couldn't stand by and watch. After what she did, what she said..." She trailed off, then looked at him directly. "You could have embarrassed her so much worse, you know. When she was screaming at you, you could have said anything and the whole world would have cheered. But you didn't." Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze thoughtful. "Humiliation doesn't fix people," he said quietly. "It just makes them bitter. Anger is a fire that burns itself out. But the truth has a way of sticking with you. She has to live with the truth of who her husband is and the truth of what she did. That's a heavier sentence than any insult I could have thrown at her." His words were simple, but they resonated with a profound wisdom. He wasn't driven by ego or a need for revenge. He was driven by a deep, unwavering belief in principle. He saw the world in clear lines of right and wrong, justice and injustice. Samantha felt a wave of admiration for him. He was the real deal. He was the kind of person you read about in books but rarely met in real life. As she was getting ready to leave, Marcus stopped her. He pulled a business card from his wallet and wrote something on the back. "You've got good instincts, Samantha," he said, handing it to her. "You see things, you pay attention, and you're not afraid to do the right thing even when it's hard." She looked down at the card. He had written the name and number of a sergeant in charge of recruitment. "Ever think about joining the force?" he asked. "We need more people like you." Samantha stared at the card, a slow, surprised smile spreading across her face. The thought had never, ever occurred to her. Her life had been a series of temporary jobs, of just getting by. She had never considered that she could be someone who made a difference, someone who upheld the law. But looking at Marcus, seeing the quiet integrity that radiated from him, she felt a flicker of a new possibility. It was a small, unexpected seed of redemption, a new path blooming from the wreckage of someone else's life. She had walked into that ballroom as an invisible waitress, but she was walking out of this police precinct as someone who had been seen, who had been valued. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope, not just for the world, but for herself. The city decided to hold a press conference. The case of the wedding day takedown, as the media had nicknamed it, was too significant to be handled with a simple press release. It was a major victory against organized financial crime, and the city's leaders, including the mayor and the police chief, were eager to take credit for it. The conference room at City Hall was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and a palpable buzz of excitement filled the air. The police chief spoke first, detailing the scope of the 18-month investigation and praising the seamless cooperation between his department and the FBI. Then he turned to the man standing quietly beside him at the podium. "And now," the chief said, his voice booming with pride, "I want to introduce you to the officer whose courage and professionalism were instrumental in the success of this operation. Recently promoted to the rank of captain, this is Marcus Reed." A wave of applause swept through the room as Marcus stepped up to the microphone. In his crisp captain's uniform, adorned with the commendations he had earned over a long and distinguished career, he was an imposing figure. He looked out at the sea of faces, his expression calm and composed. He was not intimidated by the cameras or the attention. He was a man comfortable in his own skin, secure in his own purpose. A reporter from a national news network asked the first question. "Captain Reed, the whole world has seen the video of you at the wedding. Can you tell us what was going through your mind when the bride, Chelsea Cole, insulted you? Were you tempted to react?" The room quieted, eager to hear the juicy details, the emotional backstory. Marcus looked at the reporter, his gaze steady. "I wasn't there for a personal reason," he said, his voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the room. "I was there to do a job. My feelings were not relevant to the mission." Another reporter shouted, "But it had to feel good, didn't it? To arrest the man whose wife had just publicly humiliated you? Was it about revenge?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No," he said firmly. "I wasn't there for revenge. I was there for justice. The law applies to everyone, whether they're in a housing project or a country club ballroom." He paused, letting his next words land with deliberate weight. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. It doesn't matter what their job is, what the color of their skin is, or what kind of uniform they wear. A badge, a tuxedo, a server's apron. They don't change the value of the person." The hall erupted in spontaneous, thunderous applause. Reporters, camera operators, even the other city officials on the stage were clapping. His words were a powerful and eloquent rebuke to the arrogance and prejudice that had started the whole affair. Across town, in the cavernous, silent living room of her parents' mansion, Chelsea Cole watched the press conference on a massive television screen. She was alone. Her parents were with their lawyers, trying to salvage what was left of their reputation and their fortune. Her friends were gone. Her husband was in jail. She watched Marcus Reed, the man she had called a nobody, command the respect of an entire city. She heard his words about dignity and justice, and for the first time she felt their true weight. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and shameful. They weren't tears of self-pity, not anymore. They were tears of genuine, soul-crushing regret. She finally saw it. She saw the depth of her own arrogance, the casual cruelty she had wielded like a weapon. In that moment, watching the man she had mocked become a symbol of integrity, she finally began to grasp the enormity of what she had done and what she had lost. The life she thought was so important, so perfect, had been an illusion, and the man she thought was insignificant had been the one to show her the truth. Weeks turned into a month. The legal proceedings against Bradley Cole and his associates ground forward. The news cycle moved on to other stories, but the impact of that night at the country club lingered. The city council, inspired by the public's reaction, passed a new resolution honoring the service of its police officers. And in a formal ceremony at the police academy, Captain Marcus Reed was to be honored with the city's Medal of Valor, not for a single act of bravery in the face of physical danger, but for something the chief called exemplary conduct and integrity under pressure. The auditorium was filled with officers in their dress blues, their families, and city dignitaries. It was a formal, stately affair, a world away from the chaotic scene at the wedding. As Marcus's name was called, a warm, respectful applause filled the hall. He walked to the stage, his steps as steady and deliberate as they had been that night in the ballroom. The mayor pinned the medal on his chest, a shining symbol of his service. As Marcus stepped up to the podium to give his acceptance speech, he scanned the crowd. And there, in the third row, he saw a familiar face. It was Samantha Torres. She was not in a waitress's uniform. She was dressed in a simple, smart blazer, and when she caught his eye, she beamed, clapping proudly. She had taken his advice. The day after their meeting, she had called the recruitment sergeant. She had passed the initial entrance exams and was now enrolled in the police academy's pre-training program. She had found a new path, a new purpose. Marcus smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. He saw in her the proof of what he believed, that good people, given a chance, will do good things. He cleared his throat and began his speech. He thanked the department, his family, and his fellow officers. Then he looked out at the crowd, at the rows of uniformed men and women, and at the civilians they served. "We wear these uniforms," he said, his voice resonating with quiet conviction. "And people see the badge, the authority. They see the symbol. But we can never forget that we are all the same underneath. We are just people, trying to do the right thing in a complicated world." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The real crime, the one that infects everything else, is forgetting that. It's the moment we decide that one person is worth more than another because of their title, their bank account, or the color of their skin. That is where injustice begins. The camera, filming the event for the local news, panned out. It captured the image of Captain Marcus Reed, a man of quiet strength and unwavering integrity, standing tall at the podium. It captured Samantha Torres in the audience, her face alight with inspiration and a newfound sense of purpose. And in that moment, the contrast was absolute. It was the contrast between Marcus's calm, earned pride and the silent, lingering echo of a disgraced bride's regret. It was a story of two worlds colliding and of the enduring truth that character is what you are in the dark when you think no one is watching. Power doesn't come from a uniform, a title, or a wedding ring. It comes from how you treat others when you think no one important is watching. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.